Hello and welcome to this Attunity Replicate training video. Today I'm going to be installing Replicate onto a CentOS Linux machine, and I'm going to be configuring it to run a task from Oracle to SQL. Before I dive in, I just want to give a quick overview of Replicate, and this diagram here explains the architecture and what Replicate is doing. So Replicate can replicate both full load and CDC, change data, capture data from multiple different source databases into even more target databases and streaming queues like Kafka, Kinesis, Hubs, Hadoop, and all of your standard RDBMSs as well. So I like this diagram because it shows us that Replicate is an in-memory stream processing engine, and it has two main threads, two main components. So the first being the bulk load, the second being CDC. With bulk load, this is your select star from table name, selecting all the data from your source and streaming that through transformations and filters, if you have them, into your target database. When a table completes, we know from when it starts, it has a pointer in the source database log, your T-log, your redo log, so it knows where to catch up from. So any cache changes are processed through to the target table, and we move into the CDC, change data capture processing mode seamlessly if your task is configured for both full load and CDC. We also can persist data onto disk, as shown here, this persistent store, if we have any issues with connecting to the target database. And this persistent store is also describing the metadata storage of any configuration we have in our endpoints, our tasks, and our server. They're all also persisted to disk should we lose the replication server. When the replication server comes back after the problems have been resolved, we can start again from where we left off. Okay, so Replicate is a Qlik to replicate design, advanced monitoring and control, fast loading and real-time change data capture, broadest platform support, a non-intrusive architecture, which means essentially if you can install the driver for your source or target database on the Replicate server, for instance, the instant client for Oracle, the OCI component, we can replicate your data. So that is Replicate. Okay, so I have built a Linux server. I've built mine with a GUI, and I know that doesn't reflect most server environments in Linux, but I do that in my VMs anyway, just in case I need to problem solve, and it's easier to do that for these demo environments. So I'm just going to minimize that, and we're going to come over and we're going to do everything in this putty session. Hopefully you can read this text here. So before I can install anything in my Linux server, I need to copy across the Replicate product itself. Let's just put that in documents, and also I'm going to copy across the Oracle Instant Client for 12.2 Basic. So this is the standard Instant Client that you'll see on downloads. Just be aware that if you're going to be replicating XML data types from Oracle, you will need the full client. Let's just put that in as well. Okay, so I'm currently logged in as root, but I'm just going to move across to the Attunity user that I've already created. Now, you may not need to do this, because if you run the RPM installation package for Replicate and the Attunity user doesn't exist, it will create it for you. obviously as long as you have the privileges from where you're running the installation from. So let me just cd into documents. I can see my tar zip file and my RPM for Oracle. I'm still root, but that's absolutely fine. So let's unzip the Attunity package first, and it's gunzip, isn't it? And we have our tarball, so tar minus xvf Attunity. We get our RPM out of that. So I'm going to install Replicate first, and that's as simple as doing RPM minus IVH a replicate. While that's doing that stuff, I just want to bring you across to the Replicate manual, and if I come across to, this is the HTML version of Replicate running on my local Windows machine here. So I've already got a Replicate console here, which we'll see once I've got Replicate up and running on the Linux machine. You can see this is my local host, and this is the manual. So if I come to the installing Replicate on Linux, and we can see the basic installation guide here. I'll draw your attention to all of the possibilities that are open to us when we are doing the installation. So everything in square brackets here is optional, and most of the time we don't need to do this. If you are going to be using the standard Attunity user, then that's fine, and you're installing on Red Hat derivative like I am and not SUSE. The defaults should work well for you, and I'd encourage you to use the defaults where possible. Save getting into any trouble. Don't need to mess around with changing the ports unless you have a conflicting application somewhere in your local network, because this option gives you the simplest. So you can see now that Replicate is installed, and if I do a service a replicate status, that's the name of the service that we have installed, we can see that it is running. So here you can see we've used the standard installation path, opt Attunity Replicate. The -d qualifier is our data folder, and this is the default location for it, and it's in the same path under Replicate. Standard ports are 3550 and 3552. If you want to see the actual processes that are running, there are two of them. repctl. repctl is the executable. Let me just drag that out a little bit more, clear that, and run that command again. It's still not long enough, but anyway, that'll do. So you can see here that we have two processes, both running under my Attunity user, and you can't really differentiate them apart from one came first and then one obviously came after it. So we've got 13153 as PID and 13155. So we can safely assume that this is the server component, and the second one would be the UI, the graphical interface. You can actually find it out in the bin folder, so I'll just quickly show you that whilst I mention it. So opt Attunity Replicate bin, and in here we have no we don't, it's up one and lib, I think. I'll go through these, the file structure. Maybe it's not there either. I'll go through the file structure and show you exactly where everything is. Surely might even be in data, the folder I'm looking for. Yeah, it is. So if I cd into temp and show you the PID files. So PID for 350 here is 13153. So if I bring up the repctl again, we can see that this is indeed the server process 3550 running under that PID. Don't worry about these other mutex files for a moment. So let me just cd back into home, Attunity, and documents. So we've installed Replicate, and whilst I'm here, I'm just going to install Oracle as well. Not Oracle, just the instant client. This is just a bit that we need to be able to talk to the source that I'm going to be building my task for. So now we've done that, we've got a few steps, and I'll just revert to my show notes to remind myself, and I'll put these show notes into the video down below on YouTube. So if I come to my show notes, so the first thing that we can do, we can install Replicate, we're going to install the instant client, and now we're going to do the SQL Server bits as well. But before I do that, I'm just going to grab these environment variables here, because you need to make Replicate aware of where everything is. So we need to first of all let the LD library path know where Replicate exists. And that should be before the USR lib64 component as well. Then we add again to our LD library path to let it know where Oracle exists, so where the client exists. And this is my standard installation as well. Yours may differ. So if you're not installing Oracle in the way that I did, then obviously check your path to start with. And I'm also going to be installing the Microsoft Odbc driver, of which I know the path already, and I'm then going to be also setting the Oracle home. So I'm just going to grab these, and I'm going to put them into the site-specific file for this service that is running. So I've come to Attunity Replicate bin. Let's clear the screen again. /opportunity/replicate/bin. Now in here we have repctl, which is our process that virtually controls everything. And we have the areplogin.sh, which sets our environment variables for us. Now, if you run this, it will first check for the existence of the site-specific file that I mentioned, and it will check to see if we have any site-specific variables set, and we currently don't. It's a virtually empty file. So I want to come back here and put these back into my clipboard cache again, and I'm going to buy a site file and put in my LD library path for Replicate, Oracle Client, Microsoft Odbc driver, and the Oracle Home variable, and quit that. So that's my environment variable set. Now we're going to go back to the installing a SQL client. Yeah, let's do that next, seeing as that's on my list before I start jumping into firewall rules. Now I've got a whole separate document for this, because there's a few steps, nothing particularly complicated. So if you don't have access, if your Replicate machine doesn't have access to the web, then you can do these following steps or achieve the same thing by installing these RPMs. So if your machine doesn't have access to the net, then you'll need to follow these steps up here first. And notice that I've got a note here to say the LD library path should have been updated in the in a previous section to include the lib64 path. The SQL Server connections won't work without it. So that's the bit I'll draw your attention to there. So now we're going to follow these steps. So if I just bring this down here, let's bring this over here so you can see what we're doing. Easier side by side, probably will be. I don't think these commands are particularly long, so let's do that. Might be easier to see everything. Ugh. Do hate it when it does that. There we go. Okay, so I'm already root in mind, so I should be able to just run this curl command. This goes and gets our yum repository for Microsoft, so we can then go and collect the correct packages that we need. So that's done. Then we do a sudo yum. I don't need to do sudo, do I? Because I am root. So we're just removing the Unix Odbc UTF-16 and Unix Odbc UTF-16 development packages because they conflict. But we put the development one back in a minute. You can see here that I don't have them on this version of CentOS, so that's good. Then we need to install using the repo that we've done already, and we're accepting the license agreement as well. So yum install MSODBC 13.1 and just agree to that, and there's probably a key as well, so yes to that. Okay, so that's that installed, and then we come back and put in the Unix Odbc development environment again. Say yes, no key on that one, and then we're going to copy the odbc inst.ini to the odbc ini file. Now, word of warning here, if you've got anything else configured on this machine, make sure you're not overwriting your odbc ini that may have important settings in there. I know mine hasn't, but just be aware that you're not overwriting anything important. Hopefully this is a brand new machine for you as well. So with our driver that we've just installed, unfortunately Replicate looks for the wrong version. So what we've got to do is we've got to create a soft link, a symbolic link to the correct version, which I've got here. So notice that this one is so.4.0. So I need to come here and make this actually the right version. I think. No, it's the other way around, isn't it? So that's the version I've just installed, and it's got to point to the version that is actually installed. So that's that way around, I think. No, it's not. I never get these around the right way. Is it target first, I think? And then that one. Is that right? We'll see in a moment, because I do the Odbc inst check to see whether it is correct or not. So here we have 13.4. That is the version that should be there, but we've just installed 13.7. So if I go to 13.1.4 links to that one. I think that's right. I might be wrong. We might have to come back and check that. But anyway, we've got an entry in the Odbc ini file, which is what we were looking for. Okay, so that is Oracle and SQL Server drivers installed. Now we come down to the next stage, which is opening our firewall ports. Now I could have cheated and done this on the GUI, but just remove these sudo so I can copy and paste the whole lot. What we're doing is we're opening up several ports. So chopped off the F. So yeah, 1433 we're opening for SQL Server, 1521 for Oracle, 3550 through to 3552 for Replicate. Not strictly necessary to do all of those ports. You can do 3550 and 3552 if you want. And we're opening up 80 and 443 as well. 80 won't be used in this case because all of the communication for Replicate, which is why we've opened this port, and the Enterprise Manager REST API access as well, everything's done over SSL. So I'm just going to copy in these firewall commands, and why didn't that work? Because they're not double slashes. So Notepad has converted my double dash into a single dash. Let's just put that in. So that's 3550. Let's just make sure we're doing all of them correctly. Next one is 443. Yeah, that needs changing as well. And the next one is 1521. And lastly, we have 443. No, 1433, sorry, SQL Server. And that looks okay, so that's probably enabled already. Okay. So they've all been added. We've got a success back there. And we've already seen that Replicate is running. But in order to access the GUI, we've got a couple of other steps to make. So let me go back to Attunity Replicate bin. Let's clear the screen. PWD, make sure that I'm in the right place. Show us the files that we've got listed there. Just remind ourselves that we've updated the local environment variables for this installation, or this particular service. We can have multiple services as well. So in order to make any changes, I need to first set my environment variables. So source arep login.sh. If I do an env, we can have a quick look to see that the library path is set correctly. We can see that Oracle Home is set correctly. And SQL's there as well. So we know we've got the correct environment variables for when Replicate starts. And now we can use Replicate to generate a password for us. But I'm just going to put in any old nonsense. Look at the manual for a password of your choice. I'm just going to put a password in. So again, what this is doing is resetting the password by which the server component talks with the UI component. This is actually done for you, and the service is running, but you've got no access to it. We don't know what the password was because it's generated on installation. So unless you set this password, you can't access the console. So let's set that password. Oh, yes. Latest version of Replicate says that you must have something that has 16 characters, lower and upper digits, etc. So let me set something sensible. Not really, but let's see if that works. Oh no, still not. Replicate. There we go, and it's now successful. So I'm just going to copy this so I don't forget it. Let's put it here. Save that. Okay, so it's now saved that, but we need to stop and start replicate for it to take effect. Service a replicate. Status hopefully still running. Yeah, and then we do a stop. For some reason this takes a while. So let's, while that's there we go, now it's done it. I'm just going to dive into the manual and let's restart that. Okay, so status replicate is indeed running. This is good. So now we should be able to access the replicate console. So what is my IP address? My IP address is 172.17.441. So if I open up my browser, open up a new window, paste that into the address bar, put in the port number. This is replicate differs on Linux to Windows in the fact that you need to put in the port number, and then you put in Attunity Replicate. Fingers crossed, we can access our console. And it looks like it's going to fail. It's not normally that slow. Site can't be reached. That is my Ethernet port. Yeah, my Ethernet address. Just make sure that both components are running. Yes, indeed they are. Remember how to check the firewall. Linux. Check firewall the open ports. That's firewall running. I know that. Firewall D, firewall command, firewall CMD list all. Nope, that wasn't what I wanted. List ports. Okay, so not quite sure what's going on there. Like I said at the beginning, let's have a look at the GUI as a cheat, just to make sure that I've actually set my ports correctly. So come down to sundry, which I always think is a weird place to put firewall. And let's just make that a little bit bigger. Ports. So it hasn't added my ports correctly. I stand corrected. So let me just quickly add the ports here. So 443, say OK, add 1433, 1, and then 3550 through to 3552. And I wonder if it's different in permanent. Ah, look, they're already there in permanent. Strange. Okay, let's just do a firewall reload. Ah, okay, there we go. Odd. Okay. Perhaps someone can leave me a comment in the notes down below as to why they didn't work. Okay. Back on course. So what we've done is we've done the set server password and we were trying to access the console. So let's actually see if we can now. Just do a refresh on this. Ah, there we go. This is what I was expecting to see. So notice that it's saying the connection is not private. It's because when we install Replicate, it installs some self-signed certificates. So when you're doing your installation within your organization, you will probably generate some CSR and get some proper certificates created. But I don't need to do that in this instance. I can just ignore these warnings and go to my console. Notice this pop-up. This is requesting this very password that, oh, I missed off the 5 off the end there. And it's requesting that. The username's always admin. That wasn't in the command anywhere, but it will be admin and the password that you've selected. Okay, so there we have it. We have a Replicate console. I'm now going to register a license because I won't be able to do my replication without it. The Express edition is limited to the sources and targets that you can use. I think Oracle and SQL are allowed, but I'll probably be doing a few more records than this allows. I think it's 250,000. I think I've got a few more records than that. So I'll do that first. Load, and I look for my Replicate license and register license, and that was registered successfully. So now I can make the first step, and that is creating my source endpoint. See, when I click on endpoint connections, that should allow me. I'm just going to refresh the screen again. Spinning wheel. I think I'm taxing my machine a little bit too much. Okay, so I've clicked on Manage Endpoints, and I'm going to create a new Oracle endpoint. So it's going to be a source, Oracle source, and then come down to Oracle in the list of available sources. The connection string, I've got an Oracle instance running on my machine, and it's port 1521. I've got system and my password. Let's do a test connection. No listener. Is it because I need to supply the instance? No listener. Okay, let's actually have a look at my server to see if Oracle's up and running. Oracle agent is indeed running, so not quite sure what's going on there. Is it sys instead of system? Failed to load dynamic, failed to decrypt connect item password, failed to decrypt data. The ciphertext is, I've not seen that error before. I wonder if let me just check I can actually connect to Oracle. I'm just going to minimize everything and go into need to tidy up my desktop because I can never find SQL Developer. Now the latest version of Replicate requires some extra privileges, but seeing as I'm logging in as sys, I don't think that's why I'm having the problem. Yeah, so I'm in, and just make sure I can see my HR database. Yeah, I can see that, so that's not the issue. Okay, that's a bit rubbish. Oh, listener. There's listener running. Yeah, listener's running. And I've connected okay. Let me just go back to an existing Oracle connection in Blue Peter fashion. Here's one I created earlier. Oracle as a source, /xc. One I've not used since I rebuilt my laptop. Test connection succeeded. Let me just copy and paste that. So I get that / as a backslash a lot of the time. So it's source Oracle, blah blah blah. Ah, it's not localhost, is it? Ah, but you're screaming at the screen, aren't you? Okay, so yeah, numpty, schoolboy error. So what is, I'm not connecting to Oracle on the server, it's not localhost, is it? So I need to know the IP address of the machine where it's running. What numpty. Right, let's go for 56.1. 192.168.56.1. Hey, connection succeeded. Okay, great. So now we've got our source connection point. I'm just going to copy that IP address because I'm going to need that now in order to create the other endpoint, which is going to be our target. And this is going to be a SQL Server in my case. SQL Server target. Let's come down here to find our list of available sources, which you can see there are many. Microsoft SQL Server. Because I'm on Linux, I don't get the option to use Windows authentication. So the server is there. The username is the user. And put in my password. And as a good test, we get to browse to the database that I want to replicate to. Save that. Test connection. Hurrah! Got that right this time. Now I've just remembered that I haven't cleared down my SQL Server target database. So I'm just going to do that now before I build the replication task. Actually, my machine is groaning at the moment under everything that I'm getting it to do. With two databases running, I've got OBS Studio running to record the video as well. So it's probably heaving under the pressure. So let me just go into databases, replicate, and show tables. Yeah, let's get rid of all the tables I've created previously. You sure you want to do that? Yes, I am. Thank you very much. I'll leave that open so we can have a look at the resultant tables in a few moments. So I've got my two endpoints. I can close that Manage Endpoint dialog. I go to New Task, and I'll give it a meaningful name, Oracle to SQL. I am just doing a basic unidirectional task with both full load and apply changes. This is my change data capture option. We're now in the designer wizard, which is very simple. From the left here, I can see all of my endpoints. I'm going to drag and drop my source endpoint, drag and drop my target endpoint, come across to table selection, select the HR schema, do a search for everything, select all of my tables, say OK, save, and run. Now, these tables are quite small, so we should go from the full load into CDC quite quickly. But notice the full load tables. So they're here and queued and going across to loading. 5 tables will be loaded at once, which is the default configuration parameter. You can see we've loaded 10 already. We can see the throughput, 70,000 records per second. Obviously, it's all done on the same machine, so it should be fairly quick. And you can see the progress happening here. The little ball dropping down this little graphic here tells us that we're actually doing some changes as well. We are still in full load mode. We've done 36% at the moment. You can see I've got a couple of million rows in these tables. And if I just click on selected, you can see the table progress as well. Loading is slightly different. If any changes were being made in the source, we'd see them here in cast changes. But I haven't put any through. I will put some changes through when we've gone through into CDC mode. Now on the final table, 13 completed, 1 loading. Transaction rates dropped slightly for this one table. That's just one thread, obviously, processing. 44,000 records per second. We can see a chart here, a graph, the amount of records that are being processed. And it's dropping off. So we're now pushing these through to the target. And it has finished. So no tables loading, 14 tables completed. I can have a look at them, order these outputs by the amount of rows, throughput records per second, load duration for each table, and we've got some aggregate data here as well. So 4 million records processed in 1 minute and 25 seconds. Okay, so the task's still running. You can see that here. I don't need to stop it. It's in change processing mode. So we're waiting for changes to come through. Now I've got a little widget here on my desktop that will send some transactions through. It processes transactions on the source essentially. So we're going to put, we've got our regions table, which is here. If I just order this by applied, and I'm going to put some changes through. So 100 inserts followed by 60 updates. Now we should see them come here. So we've done some inserts already. That was really quick. And we have now processed the updates as well. So you can see that is really quick. 100 inserts, 100 updates, 160 total applied, and the time last modified 1:20 PM, which matches my local time. I'm going to put a few more through. So 25 updates and 25 deletes. What I'd like this to do now, and it never does it on command, is to actually struggle to process them. For some reason on my machine, I just clicked on incoming changes here. You can see that these transactions are waiting in memory for a source commit. Now by default, the configuration settings are saying that this replicate task can use a gig of memory and it will wait for 60 seconds before writing to disk. So essentially that didn't happen. That was all in memory. You didn't see anything in either waiting for source commit on the left hand side here or written to disk on the right hand side, which is what you want to see. You don't want to see transactions being written to disk, but it might have been quite useful if it had happened, because I would have been able to show you where that occurred. So if I go back to applied changes, we can see we've now applied 220 changes, that include inserts, updates and deletes. So the probably the more interesting one for most people is processing DDL as well. You can switch this off at the task level, but I like to leave it on as a demo. And we can see now that we have actually also processed a DDL change as well, which is adding an extra column to our regions table. And now I can propagate some data through that new regions column as well as through some more updates. So you can see that being reflected here. No delays on either the source or the target, so everything going straight through in memory and propagating those changes through. Just to prove that that has all actually happened, I'll go back into SQL Server and we can take a look at my regions table where I was processing the changes through, and you can see that we've got a regions column which is added afterwards. Anything beyond these 4 lines has been added since the full load as a change data capture. So that's it. We have installed and configured Replicate on Linux. Let me just show you around the file structure because I promised to do it. So where am I at the moment? Let's just clear the screen. PWD, Attunity Replicate bin, the default installation location for Replicate. Notice that we have, let's go through some of these files. So repctl config for configuration changes, repctl for running command line parameters. Most of the command line parameters here are, we're trying to deprecate them and move them into the Enterprise Manager API. This is a link into the initd script, so the startup script for this particular service. If you want to have more than one service, you can do that using the instructions in the manual, but essentially it's putting more data into this file here. You can see that we've got one line which gives us the service name, the ports it's running on, the data folder it's using, and who owns it, essentially who installed it, which was root. If you wanted to add another service in here, you could do that with a different service name, different ports, different data folder, and a different username. Still using the same binaries though. Okay, so if we go to the data folder, this is where most of the work happens. You can see that we have all the important ones here. So all of my task definitions come in here. My mk.dat file is my master key dat file. That's the one we used to encrypt the endpoint security configurations, usernames and passwords, and the set server password that I use. That's created at installation time. You can reset it again, instructions in the manual. So if I just quickly show you under tasks, you'll just see a folder for my Oracle to SQL task, and all the metadata for that is kept in there. Any files that, any transactions that are persisted to disk, they are persisted to disk in that area. That doesn't include log streaming, which we haven't talked about. That's a completely different topic. And also in here we have the SQLite configuration files. So the repository for Replicate's all in SQLite, and that's split across these many different folders here. So you have a global repo, a few SQLite files for notifications and other expressions, etc., all stored in here. So essentially the metadata for the task that we have just created. You can export a Replicate task into a JSON file, which takes that. Let me just change the view on this. I don't like the icons here, I prefer the details here. If I select the task, I've got the option then to export it. And this gives us a JSON structure of all of that metadata. So this can be manipulated programmatically if you wish. Notice it's got the endpoint connections in there as well with encrypted passwords. So all of my transformations, filters, etc. will be included in that information when I export it. Okay, so anything else to talk about here? We talked about, so the other one would be logs, and this would be where we have all of our task logs, which are rep task underscore task name.log if it's the latest. When it gets rolled, it gets underscore timestamp appended to it. You can see that I've started and stopped my replicate server because there is a rolled version of that there. That's the latest version of the rep server log. And they're quite easy to read. And is there anything else I need to show you desperately that can't be covered in a subsequent video? Probably not. So I'll leave that here for now. That was installing Replicate on a CentOS Linux server and creating an Oracle to SQL task.